All right, let's get right into it. Today we're tackling a massive architectural decision that a ton of engineering teams are facing right now. Sticking with a classic OCR pipeline or jumping to the new wave of native multimodal AI. Consider this your guide to making that tough call. So, let me start by asking you a question. If you're managing one of those older document processing systems, you know the feeling, right? That brittleness, all the little hacks and workarounds, that constant fear that one weird character could just blow up an entire workflow. So, is it a ticking time bomb? Well, let's find out. Okay, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about what I call the two-pipeline problem. Then, we'll look at a really interesting case study showing how that legacy model just crumbles under real-world pressure. After that, we'll dive into the big shift to native multimodal AI, walk through an actual migration and its results, and then wrap up with a solid decision framework that you can take right back to your team. So first things first, let's get on the same page about the traditional approach. We're talking about the two-pipeline problem, which is really just this classic extract, then reason model that's been the standard for years. So what does that actually mean? Well, you can think of it like a two-step dance. You've got one service, your OCR, and its only job is to look at a document and pull out the raw text. Then, in a totally separate move, you pass that blob of text to another service, an LLM, to try and figure out what it all means.
And this is where you can really see the separation. You make one API call to an OCR service, like Google Vision. You wait, you get back a stream of text, then you have to make a second API call to an LLM. Every one of those steps adds latency. But even worse is that gap in between. That's where all the crucial info about the document's layout and structure just gets lost forever.
You know, this clean, two-step design seems pretty logical on a whiteboard, but it really starts to fall apart when it slams into the messy reality of real-world documents. Let's dig into a case study of a Nordic legal tech startup that learned this lesson the hard way.
This quote, wow, it just nails the core problem, doesn't it? Just let that sink in. The downstream logic, the business rules, they were all working perfectly. But the entire system was failing because the data it was being fed was fundamentally broken. It's the absolute definition of garbage in, garbage out, but with some really serious business consequences.
And here are the specific ways it failed. First, you had these diacritic errors. Simple Nordic characters were getting messed up, so a person's name would be read wrong, and an entire legal case would get routed to the wrong department. Ouch. Second, the layout was just gone. A perfectly structured table in a contract became a meaningless jumble of words, which, you can imagine, caused the AI to completely misunderstand legal clauses. And finally, media blindness. The system was built for text, but real users were uploading images and videos, things the pipeline just couldn't see, forcing people to step in and do it all manually.
So all of this pain is what's pushing us towards this fundamental shift in architecture. We are moving away from just extracting text and into a new world where our models can actually understand documents the way a human does.
And really, it all comes down to this. The old pipeline was built to answer one simple question: what text is in here? But these new native multimodal models, like Gemini, they're designed to answer a much more useful question. What does this document actually mean, including its layout, its images, the text, the whole shebang? And the advantages here are just huge. And we're talking about unified processing. One API call can handle PDFs, images, audio, video, you name it. That leads to this incredible architectural simplicity, where you replace a whole fragile chain of different services with just one powerful model. It preserves all the context, seeing the document visually, and this is a big one, especially if you're in Europe, you go from maybe 4 vendors down to just one, which makes your GDPR compliance life way simpler. Okay, so the theory sounds great, but what actually happens when the rubber meets the road? Let's look at how all these benefits translated into real, concrete results for that startup.
So here's their journey. They started with that classic setup, Google Vision plus an LLM. The quality problems forced them to check out an early multimodal model. But that one had its own limits, and then, boom, a deprecation notice forced them to make a move. And that's what led to this super smooth migration to a much more advanced model. Get this, less than a day. No, that's not a typo. The entire upgrade from one complex AI model to a newer, better one was done in just a few hours. And that wasn't because of some heroic all-nighter. It was because they made some really smart architectural choices from day one.
So, why was it so fast? I mean, this is the magic right here. Look at this table. The only thing they had to change was one line in a config file.
That's it, just the model's name. The prompt templates, the output format, the whole integration layer didn't have to touch a single line of code. That is the power of building a proper abstraction layer.
So this is a snapshot of where they were before. Latency was high because of that two-step process. Accuracy was in the gutter because of all those extraction errors we talked about. And of course, they could barely support the different kinds of media their users were actually trying to upload.
And this is after. A single API call just slashed latency. Case routing accuracy shot way up because the model finally understood the documents. And now they had complete media support, handling everything from contracts to audio files in one clean system. It was a total game changer.
Okay, so we've seen the story, we've seen the results. Now let's boil all of this down into a practical framework that you can actually use.
At the end of the day, this is the question, isn't it? It's the one every engineering lead has to answer. And look, there's no single right choice for every project, but we can definitely make an informed one by comparing these two approaches head-to-head.
Okay, this is it. This is the slide to screenshot and take back to your team because it lays it all out. Modalities. The old way forces you to bolt on new services for things like audio or video. The multimodal approach, it just handles it. Latency. 2 API calls will always be slower than 1. Simple as that. Layout handling. This one's huge. The old way literally flattens your document, losing all that rich visual context. The new way preserves it. Cost. Are you adding up multiple bills for each service or paying for one unified call? And finally, vendors. Are you managing multiple data agreements or just one? When you're dealing with complex documents, the choice starts to become pretty darn clear.
So here's the most important lesson, no matter which path you end up taking. Architect for replaceability. The AI model you pick today is absolutely going to be outdated tomorrow. If you build a clean abstraction layer around it, that future upgrade becomes a simple config change, not a multi-week frantic engineering fire drill.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. When you look at your own systems, you have to ask yourself, are you building for the model that just happens to work today? Or are you building a resilient architecture that can easily adopt the far more powerful models that are just around the corner? The answer to that question is going to define the future of your product. Thanks for tuning in.